Awesome. All right, let's get this going. So yeah, we'll be going over a few different names that I'll be looking at. Everyone should already be muted. This should only be me talking here. So just make sure to mute the music. That's the only thing that you'll be hearing other than that. But yes, I'll be going over my plan, going over a few different stocks that I like, going over the market indexes and some stocks that have earnings and stuff like that. I have identified a few different good themes as well that I want to go over and show you guys. But first thing, as always, you guys know, we want to look at the market indexes. So we want to see how the S&P is setting up, how QQQ is setting up, how Bitcoin is setting up to give us a little bit more context to what could play out this week. So the first thing I want you guys to look at is the monthly charts, right? Obviously, the month is about to end, 2 more days until the end of the month. So we have tomorrow, the 29th and the 30th. So actually 3 more days, 3 more days until the end of the month. This is probably one of the most insane monthly candles I have seen since I've started trading. I don't think I've seen another, better monthly candle. This one right here during COVID, still not even close. I don't remember the last time there's been a hammer that deep off the lows. That is a 15% hammer on the month. So that's like a 15 swing down and then a 15 swing up, 15% swing up. Pretty crazy monthly candle, right? So obviously there's still a few more days for this candle to close up, but the S&P does look like it's closing up with a potential hammer. This is technically like a dragonfly doji since it's not closing green, but something like QQQ is already green. So this one could technically be considered a hammer candle. But this is clearly very, very bullish in terms of just looking at the monthly. Now, does that necessarily mean we're going to, start a huge bull trend? Not necessarily, but it does obviously favor the odds for the bulls because this is a pretty crazy monthly candle. Last time we had a similar hammer like this was off this 8 EMA right here, and we ended up making new highs. That was this week right here in August, where we pulled in all the way off the highs in August and then came all the way back up. Now, again, is the market set up to potentially do this? Not necessarily, right? We are still facing a lot of different challenges economically. We still have to be a little bit careful of all the narratives out there with tariffs, with rate cuts, with how some of these companies are going to be reporting earnings. This week is going to be absolutely massive, right? A lot of these companies can report bad earnings, and then we could see a pretty big move to the downside in the market. So we have to be prepared for both sides. Just making an observation here that is what I'm seeing, and to me, that is clearly looking very bullish. On the monthly time frame, we did also hold the 21 and 50 EMAs. You could see in 2022, we retested the 50 EMA on the weekly time frame, and we held really well and then ended up running and making new highs. So far, that's what the S&P is doing. Now, going down to the weekly, we have a little bit of a different look. The weekly did set up a bullish engulfing candle, right? So this whole candle is engulfing the previous week's candle. Very bullish candle. We had very low volume the last week. It was also a week that was shorter, right? Obviously because of Easter. We had Good Friday, so markets were closed on Friday. That's why the volume was a little bit lower as well. But this week, higher volume, bullish engulfing, and we had high volume off the lows as well. So if you're looking at where the volume is coming in within the market, it's pretty clear to me that it is so far, has been bullish off these lows. Does that necessarily mean we'll move all the way up and make new highs? Not necessarily, because people might not want to buy near the highs, right? This was a pretty good buying opportunity when the market was already down 30%. Now, when it comes to kind of this 50% retracement of the move, it's getting, a little bit sketchy for momentum to potentially continue, right? If you draw a fib from the high to the low of the move that we made, you're kind of seeing we're entering around the 0.5 to 68% retracement, meaning we've retraced already, half of the move off the highs. That's usually how the market likes to move. It likes to move, a big move down or a big move up, and then it will retrace 50% of that move, try to see if it holds that level and then potentially continue lower, or if it breaks, it can continue to move up. So we're at a very, very key inflection point, right? And if we can break over these levels here, I could see sustained momentum to the upside. And the reason why I'm slightly leaning to the upside, obviously the monthly candle, the weekly candle looks good, but also the fact that we are starting to develop some themes within the market. So this is usually what the market needs to drive higher. We need some themes. We need some narratives to lead the markets higher, some excitement, some momentum, some hype. this is how the markets move higher. So if you remember the last few weeks and the last few months, there really hasn't been a lot of breakouts that have been following through. A lot of stocks, were trying to break out, kind of getting sold off, right? Now we're seeing a lot of continuation on some names, some new all-time highs. Stocks like Netflix, TTWO, Palantir are all leading the markets higher. And there's a clear theme to me in some of these stocks. Clear theme in software stocks, those really aren't affected much by tariffs. Obviously, there is a minor effect, but they're more so software stocks. So usually not as affected. Cybersecurity stocks have been on an absolute tear. If you look at stocks like ZS, PanW, Crowd, Palantir, right? These stocks have been super strong. So anything in the defensive sector, specifically like, cybersecurity, more so using AI for security, those stocks have been very, very strong. And I think that's a theme that's going to continue to develop. Another theme that I've been paying attention to has been renewable energy. So EOSC is another stock that I like a lot. GEV, VST, OKLO, right? These are some names. Nuclear stocks, renewable energy has been very strong. And the last theme that I'm very bullish on is quantum stocks. This is a theme that has been developing over the last few months. It went on a crazy run into the end of 2024, and then a lot of these stocks kind of pulled back. You could see like QBTS, but have held up very well, right? If you compare this to how the market has been moving, these stocks have been holding up really well, holding up all the weekly moving averages, staying up. So there's some sort of theme here, in my opinion, on quantum stocks. These are the sectors that I would want to be in, right? We don't want to look to trade stocks that are super weak, that could be negatively affected by tariff news a lot. Like some names like Nike, for example, Lulu, even Apple. Even though Apple's been rebounding nicely off the lows, I would like to stick to the names that have a established theme and that are clearly showing strength. And we'll go over these a little bit more in depth in a second, but that's kind of what I'm looking at and what I'm thinking. So if there's a theme and a narrative to drive the markets higher, if we really haven't seen like the most out of AI yet, and a lot of companies haven't really seen what AI could do, for their numbers, for revenue, even for, their margins. We're not really at the brink of like the top, in my opinion, for AI. I think the markets can eventually, move past these highs. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, this year we could consolidate for a little bit longer. There's still a lot of uncertainty, but I do think eventually some of these stocks will see new highs just because this is such a big theme. We also have the robotics theme emerging, which is something to watch as well, that I'll cover in a second. But those are some themes we should look out for, in my opinion. So going back to the S&P 500 on the weekly time frame, looks really good. We are coming up into huge resistance though. So like on all time frames, this is going to be a very big spot. We have the weekly 50 EMA, the weekly 21 EMA, and then when you go to the daily time frame, you have the 50 EMA on the daily time frame, and then you have the 200 and the 100 EMAs, right? So in every single downtrend that we've, kind of put in over the last few years, you could see that the 200 EMAs and the 100 EMAs have been super important. When we've been able to recover the moving average but then not be able to hold, we continue to make new lows, right? The only time we started to really kind of change trend is when we got above the moving averages, held into the moving averages, and then continue to see a continuation to the upside. So for me, the 200 and the 100 are going to be a very important spot. And you could see, we're lining up into probably one of the biggest resistance spots you can really think of. You have the 50 EMA, the 200 EMA, the 100 EMA, and you have this gap fill from the post-Liberation Day tariff, the tariff day that we saw on April the 2nd, where it has this gap resistance as well, right? So 564. So this level between 550 to 560 is going to be super strong resistance. That's kind of what I'm watching on the S&P. And if we look at the specific level that we want to hold above, to me, it has to be around 547, right? If we can stay above this level and build, that's going to be super constructive for bulls. If we can't hold this level, this could potentially be like a failed breakout, trapped some shorts here, and then it moves the other way, right? The reason why this high is so important is because you could see it used to be very big support. Then it became resistance a few times until we finally broke above, got a little bit of a push above that spot. Now we have to hold, right? So if a stock reclaims a level, it has to show you that it can hold that spot. If it can't hold that spot, now it's probably going to likely be a failed move above that level and break lower. Kind of something like we saw here, right? You see how we consolidated nicely here for a few days. We popped above, but we weren't able to hold. The moment we weren't able to hold, you could see we ended up making really, big new lows. Obviously, there was some news for that move down, but that could be something that the markets are setting up. So I would really watch this 547 level. Specifically watch Friday's low of day, which is at 545, right? That's going to be the pivot for the week. If we can stay above 545, I'm leaning bullish. Under 545 starts opening up more ideas to the downside. There's not a ton of downside setups out there. The markets are into really big resistance, but you're kind of more so guessing that we're going to reject off the 50, which is kind of like highly likely, but there's no real big setups to the downside that I've seen. Just kind of have to see in the beginning of the week how the market holds up and how it shapes up. Obviously, there's a lot of data as well, like big tech earnings coming up. So that's something that everyone should watch for as well. So watch this 548, 47 level, and then like 545. That's going to be the pivot for the week. If we can get above the 50 EMA this week, that will be super good for bulls. If we could stay above the 50, that will be very constructive. That's kind of the level I'm watching. 50 EMA on the daily time frame. That's the big spot. Now in QQQ, which is a sector that I track a little bit more. I usually like to trade tech stocks. So to me, the Qs are a little bit more important. Similar, like almost identical chart. The only real difference is that we had a little bit of a stronger push. You could see the Qs are already at the 50 EMA, whereas the S&P is still like a little bit off that spot. It's about like $3 or $4 off, where QQQ is like sitting right at the 50 EMA. So that's going to be the level to watch, right? This 465 level that we broke over, we need to hold that level. If we can hold and build above that spot and then break the 50, that's going to be your ideal buy point, right? So up to this point, in the beginning of the week, I would be a little bit cautious, see what the markets are going to do. We're at a huge inflection point, so there's no real reason to take on too much risk. If we can get through these highs, that's where I would probably start putting on a little bit more risk. See if the markets can tighten up, even though like to really get tight and then break that level. That would be the most ideal breakout in my opinion. So that's something that I would potentially look at for QQQ. But to see that like a little bit more in depth, we can even go on futures. So this is the US 100, which is the NASDAQ futures. You can see we are down a decent amount, 0.6% overnight. Obviously, this can open up differently tomorrow. There's still a lot of time. But just to put it in a little bit of context how this would look, we're rejecting the 50 EMA right now. What we would want to see is a test back into this level right here that broke out. So on the NASDAQ, that would be about 19,100 would be the level. That's the level you want to see hold. If we can hold and build around that spot, that sets up very constructively for bulls to potentially break out, sometime this week. That would be where you want to put on risk. So that's kind of what I'm watching. I wouldn't recommend to really get long much into the 50 EMA, right? You have to put into context what the market has been doing over the last few days. It has ran almost 10% off the lows. Like 4 days in a row, we've had almost 2% days. And the chances of another, 1 to 2% day are just so low, probability wise, that it's like not smart at all to just take a long into the 50, right? We want to be a little bit cautious going into the beginning of the week. We want to understand that we already made a really big move up. We're trading into resistance. The risk to reward is definitely not there in the beginning of the week for longs. What we want to see is the market shape up, see if it can hold these moving averages as support, see if it can hold this high as support, and then, kind of consolidate and then set us up for a new high. That's really what I'm watching into the beginning of the week. There's still some stocks that do look good for the upside into the beginning of the week, but I would be a little bit cautious of like adding a bunch of different names. Obviously big tech earnings as well, so there's going to be a lot of volatility into those earnings and stuff like that. So that's something we want to pay attention to as well. But that's kind of the look on QQQ. If you look at the weekly though, the weekly time frame just looks so good, right? Even if we go like inside week or kind of set up this week under this 472 level, that would still be a very bullish weekly chart just because of how beautiful these candles over the last 3 weeks have been. You had a super high volume move off the lows, mean reversion to the moving averages, then an inside week on low volume, and then an outside week on higher volume. That's probably one of the most bullish like weekly looks that you can get. Now, obviously, the market just needs to confirm. IWM very tight as well. This one underperformed a little bit this week compared to like QQQ and SPY. Didn't really make any new highs, but it's setting up super tight. So this could potentially be a nice one to catch up a little bit early week because it already has a setup, right? It's still a little bit off the 50 EMA, meaning we could look to take it maybe up to the 50 EMA for the first target. You could see on the hourly, it is very, very tight. It's got kind of like a flag look to it. If it breaks over 195, that could be a nice move to 199. On the weekly time frame, you have a very strong outside bar on the weekly, which looks super, super solid. Now, the Dow was a little bit weaker than the rest of the market. You could see the Dow did not make a new high relative to last week's high. So you could see the S&P made a new high, QQQ made a new high, the Dow did not. Meaning, right, what does this mean? This means that industrial stocks are a little bit safer. These would be called usually like cyclical stocks or consumer stocks, have been a little bit weaker. And this would point to the fact that tech stocks have been stronger, right? When tech is getting a lot of flows, when there's a lot of money rotating into tech stocks, usually consumer stocks are a little bit weaker. And we want to be, a little bit careful of consumer stocks. When tech stocks are weaker, usually consumer stocks are a little bit stronger. So what I would be watching this week is to see how these pair up, right? If the Dow is going to be a little bit stronger, maybe tech stocks do pull in a little bit because they'd had a really good week, and that sets up for a move later, right? And then these names could potentially catch up a little bit, and we could look for a little bit of upside in these stocks, right? So that's why I'm watching, for example, Dollar Tree. That one is usually a pretty, defensive stock. It moved really well the last few weeks while the markets were weaker, and it's been pulling back over the last few days while the markets have been stronger because a lot of flow is going into tech stocks. So that's kind of something I'm looking at. You could see the daily a little bit weaker, right? A lot of the stocks, a lot of the markets, the major market indexes are making new highs. This is still off the highs, so that's something to pay attention to. So watch to see what the Dow does. That will give us a little bit of a clue on how tech and risk on names are moving. And then last but not least, Bitcoin, clearly rejecting this $95,000 level. That was an absolutely massive spot. I mean, you could see we had multiple holds of this level, multiple holds, a big rejection. Now we're rejecting again. Very typical of, an asset class that moved like almost already 20% off the lows, right? It's not going to just go straight up. What's going to happen is it'll consolidate a little bit. If it wants to continue to go up, it'll shape up, a flag or a continuation pattern, something like exactly like it did here. You see it went up, it went sideways for like 20 days or 10 days, and then it broke out, right? That's how stocks and assets move, right? They move up, they go sideways, they move up if that's where the trend is going to be. So that's what I'm looking at for Bitcoin. It's rejecting this level here a little bit, but it gave us a little bit of clues early last week that the markets were going to be strong. You could see on Monday, April 21st, it broke out. Then Tuesday, it really, really ran super hard. And that's what gave the markets a little bit of a boost, right? We kind of saw Bitcoin was front running the markets. It gave us a little bit of an idea of what the markets are going to do. And it's kind of doing the same thing here as well, right? It's rejecting. And then now you could see on futures, the markets are rejecting a little bit as well. So it's kind of giving us a little bit of an idea of what the markets are doing, and a little bit of like a front run into the views of what markets are doing. So this could potentially be like a double top here for a bit, sets up, and then potentially looks to break out. Kind of something similar to like what Palantir did. The charts are very similar. You could see it has a double top here. Palantir went sideways for a few days and then it broke out. That's kind of what I'm looking at for Bitcoin. So the reason why I look at Bitcoin is it kind of gives us an idea on how like risk on names look. You could also see the pullback has been on very low volume. That's exactly what you want to see in a bullish pattern. Usually you want to see very high volume as the stock moves up, low volume as it consolidates, and then high volume again as it continues to move higher. So that's what I'm looking at for Bitcoin. Also, I do like crypto stocks a lot, right? We're in Coinbase, MSTR, some names like that. So those ones could continue to shape up for us and set up for maybe some more size to be added on those. I would like to see them kind of consolidate a little bit. For example, Coin has just been going straight up. So it wouldn't be bad if it goes a little bit sideways. It got through the 50 EMA already. So a little bit of sideways action wouldn't be bad at all. MSTR, same thing, right? If this can tighten up back into like 365, let the 8 EMA catch up, set up for a continuation move, that's absolutely lovely. That's what we'd want to see on that. So that could be a look on Bitcoin. Now, going into the VIX, this is something we've talked about a lot over the last few months, right? A lot of traders, when the market is super bullish and we're just going straight up, don't even really know what the VIX is. So a lot of you might even learn like what the VIX was the last few months. Always important to look at where the VIX is at, right? Because this relates a lot to options premium. The cheaper the VIX, the cheaper the options premiums are, right? So up here at like $60, the options premiums are super juiced because the markets are expecting to make absolutely huge moves. But the lower volatility gets, the lower the moves that are being made in the markets are, the cheaper the contracts that are going, the cheaper the contracts are because there's lower implied volatility. So you always want to get an idea of how low the VIX is and what the VIX is doing. Trading at $24 right now, it's setting up right at an important level as well. So if you look at the VIX and you look at the S&P, they're kind of inversely correlated. Obviously not like an inverse ETF like SQQ, for example, for QQQ. But technically, usually when the markets go up, VIX comes down because less uncertainty, less volatility, but it's not always necessarily true. However, sometimes you can use them in like a negative correlation way. So if you see the VIX is like right at an important spot at 24.8, if the VIX bounces a little bit early in the week, we'll probably see a little bit of a move down on the major indexes, right? Because we know this is a support level and then this is a resistance level. So you can kind of line them up together. That's kind of the level I'm watching. It has a huge gap to fill. If you look at the hourly time frame, the gap is all the way down to $21, right? So almost a $3 gap on the VIX. If this starts getting into the gap, we could see a very big move in the markets. So that's kind of what I'm watching. If it continues to hold here, then that would obviously set the markets up for a little bit of a rejection off that 50 EMA, which is pretty likely to me. So we got to watch and see how the markets react to that level. But that's pretty much the major indexes. In terms of some sectors that I'm looking at that look really good, guys, IGV looks absolutely phenomenal. So as I mentioned to you guys, software stocks, right? So when you're looking for a strong sector, what you want to look for is A, volume, and B, you want to see how relatively strong it is to the markets, right? So if you put like, let's say you add, QQQ, which is, if you're looking at software stocks, usually you want to compare it to QQQ. You can compare, QQQ price action and IGV price actions. For example, you can clearly see if we line this up that, QQQ and, IGV are moving very, very similarly, but IGV is already over the 50 EMA. So if you look at QQQ below the 50 EMA, if you look at IGV, which is software stocks, they're already above the 50 EMA, which are clearly showing relative strength. So it's kind of like a day ahead or about like 2 days ahead of tech stocks, right? The overall tech index, meaning software stocks are trying to lead the tech index higher, right? Now, obviously, since the tech index is lagging a little bit to software stocks, there has to be some sort of sector that's a little bit weaker, and that's something you want to pay attention to as well. You want to find the weak sectors and the strong sectors, because if the markets, let's say, reject, we want to find the sectors that have been lagging, the ones that are weaker, right? These are the ones that are usually going to continue the weakness and the downside movement. And then if the markets are strong, we want to focus on strong sectors like software stocks. So IGV is a super strong one. If you look at the weekly time frame, it's already above all the weekly moving averages as well, right? So a lot of the software stocks moved super, super well the last week. I think these are all setting up really well. If the markets continue to move higher, this is set up for higher, right? And the price action has just been a lot cleaner on a lot of different stocks than some of the price action we've seen in the last few weeks. A lot of breakouts have been holding up really well. There's been a decent amount of momentum as well. So it does seem like a little bit of character change here in the markets. So that's something we want to pay attention to, see if we get continuation in that. And then we can look to play some of the continuation there. So now going into my plan and some of the stocks that I'm looking at, guys, there's a good amount of names to look at. I mean, if you look at my list, I have almost 40 stocks, but I narrowed it down to a few stocks that do look ready in the beginning of the week. And I also narrowed it down to a few stocks that I'm really focusing on to get an entry that might be a little extended that I want to see a retest on. So that's a few names that we'll cover. First of all, going over my positions really quickly. I'm in Coinbase from 178. Been riding the momentum on this one really well, up like almost 250, 300% on contracts on this one. I'll continue to hold this as long as it stays above the most recent highs. This is something I'd love to add onto, right? If we can, build a little bit, consolidate, and then set back up, this is something I would love to get more of. So I would love my exposure in crypto stocks. Like crypto stocks have been moving really well, specifically since Bitcoin started to break out. So I see no reason not to continue to hold some of these names. You got above the 821 EMAs, we got above the 50 EMA, clearly showing some relative strength. There's a lot of room for higher. This has a gap to fill all the way up to 216. And it also has, not really a lot of resistance until 232. So there's a lot of room for Coinbase to go higher. This is one that I potentially want to get some more on. So super nice name. Another name we're in, IONQ, very bullish on quantum stocks. I want to potentially even get, some options on some of these quantum names. I'm looking at QBTS. I'm looking at QUBT, at RGTI. Some quantum stocks look very, very good. Look at the volume patterns, right? Every single time we've had a lot of, a big move off the lows, it's been on very high volume, right? The sells have been on lower volume than like the big moves up. You've had lower volume here as we, pulled in, consolidated, and then high volume as we broke out on Friday. Just super, super strong setup here. And I think this is going to move higher, right? Above all the moving averages. It just needs to hold above this like 28 level. And now it's set up for potentially higher on this. For this stock, I'm only in equity. So I'm only in shares, but potentially looking to add some more exposure via options on some of these names. I really like quantum stocks. I think these are going to be absolutely phenomenal. Tesla still in a majority on this one. Just want to see this one, get back through 292. Is it probably going to pull back next week, early next week? Most likely, right? Because it made such a big run. If you look at how much it moved off the lows, right? This is what you want to be careful with. Don't start chasing some of these stocks, especially if you didn't get in last week. Guys, there's going to be so many opportunities. This is where most traders go wrong. They'll start to get FOMO specifically on stocks that they missed, and they'll start chasing them, right? Look at what happened every single time this stock ran more than 20% off the low. Right here, it ran more than 20% off the low, pulled all the way back. Right here, it ran more than 20% off the low, pulled all the way back, right? So I'm not saying it's going to pull all the way back, but it's probably going to offer you another entry, right? You just have to be smart and let it set up. Could it potentially continue to run on Monday? Yes, but the risk reward is just not there. So I would wait for it to, pull in a little bit. For me, my final kind of main target would be around 294, but then I'd want to add, longer out contracts and look for it to really establish a trend, right? If you look at what it did in 2024 after the elections, that's exactly what it did, right? It made a big pop up, it pulled in, set up, moved up, right? Popped up, set up, pulled in, moved up. Same thing, right? This is how strong stocks move. So if there's going to be continuation, you'll have a ton of opportunities to get in. The worst thing you could do is chase. So wait for this big setup to actually, break out through the highs at 292. Could it potentially get momentum tomorrow? Sure, right? But we don't want to be chasing it. We want to be smart about our entries. So looking for this to consolidate, set up, potentially roll out my contracts. Same thing with MSCR, right? This is another stock that's pretty extended off the lows. I'm holding it just because I'm still in profits. There's no reason for me to sell the whole, position, but it's up 52%. So I would like for it to go maybe a little bit sideways, hold around like this retest here at 340. That would set up for, another contract potentially in like June or maybe July even to take a little bit more time. This one could reach all the way up to 400, 435. So that's something I'm looking at. So these are the names I'm in. Now, some names I'm looking to potentially add early in the week. These are setups that I think look ready. I'm probably just going to trade these a little bit quicker. The reason why is because, again, the market's a little bit extended, so I'm not necessarily wanting to add too many swings, but I do think that there's opportunities for quicker like day trades or, quicker swings to trade. These are some of the stocks that look set up to me. So, for example, RKLB looks very, very good. This does have earnings coming up. 40% of the S&P 500 is reporting next week. So that's going to be obviously pretty huge, right? There's a lot of stocks reporting. I think actually that might be over the next 2 weeks, but there's a lot of stocks reporting over the next 2 weeks. So be careful with earnings. Don't get, caught up in an earnings move. Be careful of the IV. The IV is going to be very high on options, but I think RKLB can be a great continuation play. So this one broke out over $22. You could see on Friday here, it closed above 22 for the first time since breaking under it right here, which was in February, so about 2 months. You could see how important this level has been. It was huge support here, then it became resistance here, resistance until we finally got above and closed above. I think this sets up for higher. Aerospace stocks have been super strong. I like the way it closed out on Friday. It's set up in a 15-minute and hourly flag, which is something we look for in these moves. So I think if it can get over 22.56, this sets up for continuation higher. And if you look at some of the resistance this has, there's really not a lot of resistance until like 25 and maybe even 28, right? It moved so quickly from this level right here at 28 all the way down to 22 that it could do the same thing the other way. When stocks move very fast, to the downside, there's not a lot of leftover sell orders, that are left over. So price will move very quickly through that level. It's kind of called like a volume gap. So that's potentially something we could look at for RKLB. I like it if it can get through the prior day's high. Ideally, we maybe want to wait for it to set up a little bit more, maybe a few more days of consolidation, let the EMAs catch up. But you could see the EMAs are already starting to cross. The 50 is crossing under the 8. The 8's crossing above the 50. The 21 is about to cross over the 50, which is obviously a bullish cross. So that's something we could potentially look at for the next few days and weeks on this stock. Looks absolutely phenomenal. Now, my highest conviction idea this week is going to be ZS. I think this is probably going to be the best name. The reason why is because you can see how many times it's rejected this level, right? If you look at the weekly time frame, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rejections, right? The more a stock rejects a level, the more it's likely to finally break above that spot. Think about like supply as like a limited, it's like a limited bank of supply. There's only so many shares that could be sold at a specific level. The more price tests a specific level, the more it starts to eat away at supply. So the more tests you have, the better, because that means that buyers are eating away at this level, right? And once they finally break through that spot, there's just going to be an absolutely insane rush of demand into that level. Obviously, buyers will take over that spot and then push us back into the highs, which is kind of what I'm expecting on this. Now, every other stock that's failed to break very important levels, has been moving the past few weeks. So if you look at TTWO, same kind of idea. Look at how many times the stock tested this high. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, a ton of tests at this level right here, and it finally got to break above, right? The market is kind of showing us that there's a little bit of a character shift. Strong stocks are finally able to break key levels. That's something we haven't seen in a while. So that's why I'm thinking ZS is going to be an absolutely monster move. Would I like for it to set up maybe a few days under this level? 100%, right? So this is something we can watch the whole week. But if it breaks out early Monday, I wouldn't hesitate to take it just because of how much consolidation it has on the weekly time frame, right? If you look at the weekly time frame, it's gone almost a year of consolidation since right here. This whole base is almost a year, right? So we know big bases lead to really big moves. Again, if you look at TTWO, that one had a pretty solid base. And you could see that the move that I made last week, that was an absolutely phenomenal move, right? So that's what I'm looking at, ZS. And again, keep in mind, ZS is a cybersecurity stock. So this has been a theme, right? We've seen Crowd was the leader for this. We saw Palantir move up. Crowd, you could see how well this one moved. This is exactly what I'm thinking ZS does, right? You could see, it has that big level right here, breaks through that level, ends up running. So I'm thinking ZS pulls the same kind of move here. That's why my conviction on this one's so high. Again, cybersecurity stock, leading theme. It had a ton of volume compared to the markets. The markets had very low volume into the end of the week, whereas ZS had a ton of volume. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you someone is loading the boat, right? Do we know who it is? Probably not yet, but someone is clearly loading the boat, right? Whenever you see a lot of volume, that's not retail. So someone's loading the boat on this. I think there's a lot of strength in these names. So I think this should be a nice mover. Whether it triggers tomorrow or sometime later in the week, I think this should be a top watch. So over 217 is the level I'm looking at for this. If it breaks that spot, if you look at the weekly, it really has not a lot of resistance, right? Until 220. And it even has a gap to fill at 226. So it has a lot of room to the upside on that move. So that's a name that I'm really, really interested in. Another stock that I like is Dollar Tree. This one is not a tech stock, but it's because if tech does pull back a little bit because of the strong move we've seen, I think Dollar Tree could be a nice hedge for a long, because this one usually moves really well when tech stocks are weaker. It made a super nice move off the lows, and it's been consolidating, right? This is exactly what I'm thinking that a lot of tech stocks do. They make a really nice move off the lows, they go sideways for a little bit, they set up, and look at the volume, right? If anyone has been learning the volume strat that I've been teaching for the past few years, this is exactly what you want to see on a pullback. Very low volume as the stock pulls back. Ideally even decreasing it lower and lower and lower. This just means volatility is contracting, but supply is not expanding, right? If supply was expanding, that would mean that there would be a ton of volume and sellers would get very, very aggressive, and you'd see it off the volume, right? So you'd want to see high volume sell to kind of get an idea that this is going to be a failed breakout. But when you see lower volume on the sells, usually that's a very good indication of continuation to the upside. And volatility is just contracting and setting up for a potential move. So it's setting up in a potential flag here right off the 8 EMA. For this one, I like it because it has an inside day. So if it can break over the inside day high, 81.78. If you look at the hourly, it's setting up in a nice tight flag as well. If it gets over that spot, I think it could be a nice trigger move up to $85. So that could be a really nice play on the stock Dollar Tree. So that's the one that I like a lot. Another stock that looks great. I was looking between QBTS and RGTI. Honestly, either one of these could work. So if you look at the setup on RGTI, very similar setup. It looks almost identical. Either one of these could work. The reason why I chose QBTS, the options are a little bit more liquid. It also had a little bit of nicer volume patterns, and it was the leader for, quantum stocks recently. So I think this one is a little bit stronger, but either one could really work, to be honest. I think quantum stocks in general are just going to be an absolutely beautiful play. So I'd watch this one for a break over 7.7. If it can get over that high, I think it runs all the way up to $8, maybe even, $8.95, $11 and higher. This could be a super, super nice idea. Nice volume out of the right side of the base, was consolidating the whole time with very, very low volume. It's exactly what we want to see. And super beautiful setup. The last stock I'm looking at is EOSE. So this is a renewable energy name. This is a name that has a lot of their products American made. So, kind of going against tariffs and stuff like that. Could be super, super strong. Got a super nice setup and moved off the lows, went sideways. It's still kind of tied up in this flag here. This one I'm potentially just looking to trade shares on it. You could look to either get shares or you can look to take options on it. You can get like the 6 call. Even if it moves all the way up to the high with just shares, this is a 26% move, right? So that's still a very nice play. So I'm looking at either one for those. The reason why I probably wouldn't get options is just because it has earnings coming up. So the IV is pretty high on the options, but you can go with options. You can go with shares, whatever works better. Look at the weekly time frame though. I mean, it's just like perfect, right? It's getting accumulated clearly, right? Ton of volume as it goes up, low volume as it goes sideways, ton of volume as it goes up, low volume as it goes sideways, ton of volume again as it goes up. And this one also has like a 30 or something % short interest, meaning that it could potentially squeeze like insane squeeze if it starts getting through some key levels. I really like trading stocks that have very high short interest. These are ones that have very, very high potential to squeeze out of basis and stuff like that. So this would be the last name that I'm looking at for, an actionable move tomorrow. There's a ton of other names that I'm paying attention to as well. These are some more names that I would look for like retests on, right? So another stock that I think looks really good, either between ASTS or RKLB, you can honestly go with either name, whichever one you like more. ASTS could honestly set up really well as well into the beginning of the week. It has a very clear trigger level at the 50 EMA right here at $25. If it breaks over $25, I think ASTS could be a nice one up to 29 and then potentially 34.5 could be a very, very nice setup. Both this one and RKLB look very good. You can honestly interchange them, whichever one you prefer. A few other ideas that I really, really like. Crowd has to be on watch, right? This was one of the strongest names last week. It made an absolutely insane move, pretty high volume on this, leg up. For me, if a stock already made a pretty nice move, like a 3-day move up, all I'm watching for is just for it to pull back to the breakout level, right? This is clearly the breakout level at 402. If it could just pull into this spot, this is an easy buy into this breakout level, right? Because it's just retesting that spot. That would be somewhere around the 8 EMA as well. So for stocks like this, I'm not going to have like a clear trigger to use, but you could just use the previous high, right, as your retest level. So this is something I would potentially look for a retest on. Palantir, another one, right? This is one of the strongest stocks in the market. Clearly, it's clearly in your face. Like if there's anything that's more clear, it's got to be the fact that this is one of the leading stocks in the market, making new highs, getting even close to all-time highs, while the rest of the market is super, off the high still. Clearly a leading stock, leading the move up, right? And this is one that we definitely want to be involved in. So again, 3 days to the upside. You don't want to chase here, right? People are going to be chasing here. This is not what you want to do, okay? Look what happened last time. It made the same move, right? It moved 3 days off the lows. It went sideways for 2 days. Then it broke out. Then after it broke out, it went sideways, right? Remember, stocks don't go straight up. They don't go straight down, right? There's always going to be opportunities to, take advantage of the trend. You want to wait for setups into these important levels and then play the continuation move, because if you chase, all you're going to be doing is just setting yourself up for a terrible probability trade where you take, a trade into resistance after making a huge move up. And then you wonder why you don't make money, because you're not patient. You don't wait for the right setup. So we have to wait for the right setup on Palantir. For me, that's looking for the 8 EMA retest or back into the 100 level. I'm not sure it'll come all the way down to 100 because that is 12 points away. But even if it comes down to the 8 EMA, that's something I could potentially look to buy. You can see that's exactly what it did the last few times it retested, right? Right here, it tested the 8 EMA, move up. Tested the 8 EMA, move up. So that's exactly what we'll be looking for the strong move up on Palantir. Another name that you want to pay attention to, Netflix. Definitely pay attention to this name. The reason why, again, it's leading the markets higher, right? Look at the weekly time frame. It's literally making new all-time highs while the rest of the market is below the highs, right? That's clearly a leading stock. A ton of volume here post earnings. It's been super strong. Again, tariff resistant because it's a software stock. It's got literally everything we want to look for, right? So again, you don't want to chase at the highs. Wait for it to set back up into the previous high and retest. That's going to be your entry level, right? So ideally, you're looking for something even like this. If it can go sideways for a few days, set up a flag, you can play the breakout, right? We don't want to be chasing these moves, but super nice setup on it. You can see volume has been declining as the stock's been going up. That's usually a pretty good indication that it's a little bit exhausted and it's probably going to, tighten up, pull in, all that good stuff. So that's what I'd be looking at. Netflix, another leader, TTWO. This one is breaking out of a monthly base. So it's set up in a huge monthly base, breaking out over the key high, right? Huge monthly candle. And if you look at the daily time frame, it's above this big daily level. Same thing as all the other stocks we were just talking about, right? We don't want to chase it at the high, but if it can retest, right, that would be our entry, right? So these would be really good retest candidates. Crowd, Palantir, Netflix, TTWO. So don't get too ahead of yourselves. Be a little bit patient. Wait for these to retest. And I promise you, these are going to pay really, really nicely. You don't have to chase them. You'll be able to just wait a little bit, get some nice, retests around the 8 EMA. If the market trend is going to continue to be higher, we are going to see a lot of these stocks come down and retest. And even if it's going to be lower, they're going to come down obviously as well. So you don't want to be chasing near the highs. We do want to wait for things to set up a little bit more. A few more names that I like. AVGO is a standout, name to me. The reason why is because the semi sector has been a little bit weaker over the last few weeks. It's below the 50 EMA still. This is really what's dragging, the markets lower. If you look at all the names within QQQ, all the names that are underperforming right now are semi stocks, right? These have been the ones that have been leading the markets lower over the last few weeks, specifically the last few months, even since this high was made here in February. So we need to see semi stocks really start to pick up. So for example, Nvidia needs to really start leading again, right? This one's still under the 50 EMA, while a lot of other names are above the 50 EMA. So this one needs to start leading again. See if this one can start to move up. This will give us a lot of clues on what the markets are going to do. If Nvidia could be strong, that could obviously help out a lot of the semiconductor names, the chip sector. That could set up nicely. But if you look at AVGO and compare it to Nvidia, clear strength, right? You could see Nvidia is below the 50, AVGO is above the 50, and it's already above the previous high right here. So clear strength. That's why I'm looking at AVGO. If semi stocks are strong this week, this could be something to look at. See if it could set up, somewhere around this 196 level. The weekly looks pretty great on it. It's back above the weekly moving averages. So super, super solid setup. And the last name that I'm really paying attention to is going to be HIMS. This one is curling pretty nicely. If you look at the weekly, it's right off the 50 weekly EMA. Every other time, back here, it's tested it, like right here in 2024, got a really nice explosion higher. So that could be a very nice spot to potentially look to get long on, but it's not my favorite name yet. Reason why, you should already kind of have an idea, but it's below all the moving averages, right? It's still below the 21, it's still below the 50. It is above the 8-day, but below the 21 and the 50 is usually, not a great sign. And it is lagging the market a little bit, right? The market's already above the 21-day and the 50-day, or not above the 50-day, sorry, above the 21-day, but like sitting right at the 50-day, whereas HIMS is still below. So this is one that I'd like to see develop, but not entirely, ready to make a move on it yet. See what it does. Could potentially look for a quicker trade on it, but that's the look there on that stock. And that's pretty much going to wrap it up. There's a few really, really good names. A few other ideas in, cybersecurity. PanW looks awesome as well. There's a few other names in aero stocks that I like. Axon is another one. ACHR, ASTS, RKLB. Those are some names we talked about. Quantum stocks, RGTI look really, really good. If we're looking for some downside ideas, I think oil and, like gas names look pretty good lower. If you look at XOM, you have a nice kind of bear flag forming here. If you look at USO, which is US oil, you have a potential bear flag forming here as well. So I think these could be decent maybe to the downside, but it's too early to tell. We'll see if there's any follow through or any continuation. If there is, obviously I'll update and I'll let you guys know. That's something I'm looking at. But yeah, I'd have to see how this sets up. I'm not rushing to potentially short anything, maybe take a little bit of hedges here into resistance, but I want to see the markets, I want to see what they do this week. This week's really going to be like I think a momentum, building week. It's either we have a ton of really good earnings, because again, keep in mind, right, 40% of the S&P is reporting over the next 2 weeks. So we either have a ton of very good earnings, right? So obviously we had Tesla and we had Google. So far it's like 1-1. Tesla had, some pretty bad numbers. Google had some pretty good numbers, even though surprisingly Tesla reacted better than Google. That's why, earnings are always 50-50, but we'll have to see like what the overall, guidance is as well for the next few quarters. Do companies think that tariffs are going to affect them a lot over the next few quarters, or is it going to be less than, anticipated? So we'll have to see how the guidance looks like. Obviously markets are probably going to look a lot at Apple, because that one is very, very, affected by tariffs. Apple's going to be a big one. Obviously we also have Microsoft coming up, Amazon coming up. So there's a lot of earnings to look at, which are going to obviously be important. Meta as well. So that's going to be kind of like the setting stone for the week, kind of like the momentum to see what the markets do. So a lot of opportunities. This week, I'd probably in the early part of the week be a little bit more cautious, not really chase anything, to the highs, to the upside. Again, reason why, because we are a little bit extended into resistance. So that's usually the worst time to get long. So just be a little bit more patient. I think into like Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there'll be a little bit more setups to the upside as things tighten up a little bit. There's going to be a lot more opportunities, but again, there's still a lot of really good stocks. Like ZS, for example, I'd probably take in the beginning of the week. It just looks so good. Quantum stocks, I'd probably take in the beginning of the week. Those look very, very good. So there's a few stocks that do look set up. But overall, let's see how the markets look this week, how they set up. If you guys have any names you want me to look at, you can go ahead now. I'm going to do like a little Q&A. We can look at some charts you guys have. So drop them in chat and we can get through some stocks. Spotify is another very, very strong stock. I mean, if you look at what Spotify looks like, it's setting up exactly like how Netflix is setting up. So setting up in a super, super tight kind of flag here on the weekly time frame. And I mean, if you look at Netflix and you look at Spot, the setup was almost identical before, Netflix broke out. So obviously Spotify does have earnings this week, but I would be surprised if it doesn't make new highs just based off the fact that it's setting up almost identically to Netflix. So I think somebody knows something on this. It could be pretty nice. Cover NVIDIA, SoFi, or AMD. I went over NVIDIA. We'll look at SoFi really quick and AMD. SoFi looks absolutely great. I think this is probably one of the best names to own in the long term. Super, super nice weekly chart. So it broke out of a stage 1 base, and now it's retesting right at the stage 1 base breakout right here, holding really nicely. It does have earnings coming up, so that's the only thing. It's like always a 50-50 with earnings. But I think overall this would be a good long-term hold. I have been seeing a lot of their, ads and stuff like that recently, so I think they're scaling pretty nicely. I think it's going to be a good one for the next few years. But super nice setup on the weekly. You just have to see how earnings look here. And then AMD, right? AMD is also pretty solid. I would actually say AMD looks a little bit better than a lot of the semiconductor names. It was already so beaten down on the weekly, right? If you look at the weekly time frame, it is holding this very important uptrend line right here where we held in October 2022. We held back here in 2018. Now we're holding right here as well. A ton of volume off the lows. It is pretty interesting. Now, again, I wouldn't really go like bottom fishing for stocks that are, weaker off the lows, but this could be interesting for a potential reversal, kind of change its character a little bit, see what it does. I do think if, the markets are going to reverse, this could be a good one to start, owning just because it's down so much off the highs. So we'll see. It also has earnings coming up. That's going to be pretty big, but the 97.5 level is going to be the big level to watch for this week. If it can break over that, it could easily test the 50 at $100. Before a buy, watch for volume and what else? You want it to break a key level and you want volume. That's pretty much it, right? You don't want to overcomplicate it. So for example, if you look at, AMD here, if we're looking at what level to buy, it's clearly going to be this 97 level, right? The reason why is because it's rejected multiple times at this level. And we just want to see volume to confirm, right? So the level is going to be your trigger. The volume is going to be your confirmation. There needs to be a lot of volume as the stock breaks out. So I'll show you an example, right? look at Palantir. As the stock breaks this key level, so the key level is clearly going to be right here, right? We have the high at 98, right? Rejected twice. That's going to be the key level. So what you're looking for is higher volume, right? So it should be at least higher than the cloud, which you could see for, Palantir was like, slightly over the highs of the cloud here. And on the lower time frames, you'll see a lot of volume come in as well. So like if you look at the 15-minute time frame, as it's breaking that level, a ton of volume. If you compare it to, all the other opens, it was one of the biggest opens we've seen in a while. So that's usually how you'd be able to confirm. Could I look at CVX and Oxy to the downside? Yeah, really, really good to the downside in my opinion. I think these are set up nicely. I think probably Oxy looks a little bit better. Maybe CVX needs a few more days to go sideways, but it does have this bear flag here. I would probably take it maybe under 137 for your trigger. I think Oxy looks a little bit cleaner in terms of how the bear flag is setting up. The only thing I'd want to see on this one is more volume for the downside move. So if it breaks like, $39, I would want to see a lot of volume come in because the volume has been pretty dry. Could I elaborate on stocks with high shorts? Yeah, so like high short interest would mean a lot of the float is shorted. So like 30% of the float sometimes, like this stock, for example, is a 30% short interest, meaning 30% of the float, like the current float is shorted. So if it has a very big move, a lot of the shorts are going to be forced to cover. And since there's an excess of shorts, usually somewhere around like 10 to 20% of the short of the float being shorted is very, very high. It could squeeze, right? These are squeeze candidates, meaning the moment it starts to, shorts start to cover, it's like a domino effect. Because think about it. The more they cover, to exit a short, you need to buy back the stock, right? So it adds more fuel to the move up. So if one short covers, now the stock goes up, the next has to cover, next has to cover. So think about it like a domino effect. Sometimes the dominoes could really fall into pieces and you have an absolutely huge short squeeze. Like if you look at GameStop, for example, that one was, a very huge short squeeze in 2021, sorry. So yeah. SMCI above EMAs, yeah, it looks solid. It does have earnings coming up soon, but I really do like this one over 36.5. Solid. Thoughts on DG? Another really good one. Yeah. So I think DG and Dollar Tree both look really good. Very similar, stocks. They're both, dollar stores. So the setup looks really good on both. I like it over 94.62 over that inside day high. TOST looks solid, right? Software stock looks really good. I actually have this one on my list. If you look at the weekly chart, even nicer. It broke out of a stage 1 base into stage 2. Now it retested the stage 1 high. And it's setting up in a super tight flag. So if it can get over 37, it looks good to the upside. Palantir, you want to see that one retest the 100 level breakout, or at least the 8 EMA. It's a little extended. Would MSCU be considered extended since it's far away from 8 EMA, or do you take into account all the other EMAs from price? It is extended. It is extended. I mean, not only based on the fact that, it's away from the 8 EMA, look at how much it's moved off the low already without really going sideways much. If you measure the move from the low, it's 120% already. So that's usually extended, right? Like it did the same thing here. It moved straight off the lows, then it came down. So usually what happens is, stock needs to go sideways a bit before it is able to make a move up. DraftKings actually looks pretty solid. It looks like a higher low is being made here. It would need to get over 36 to really see any momentum on it. First Solar, I really like First Solar. It just has earnings coming up. This is looking a little bit more like a bottom to me here on First Solar. You can see a ton of volume off the lows. I think renewable energy is going to start bottoming soon, so I like it. You can see the weekly looks like sellers are really, really getting thin. This looks good. It just has earnings coming up, but you could look for maybe like an earnings run up. What positions am I holding? Right here, you can see my position list. These four. XYZ. This one looks okay. It's below the 50 EMA still, so I'd be a little bit cautious because it has been a weaker stock. Also on the weekly, you can see it's way below all the weekly moving averages, so there's gonna be a ton of resistance. But if it gets over like 58.5, you can maybe trade it back up to 61 at the 50 EMA for like a quick move. Banks, GS, or SoFi. We went over SoFi. That one looks phenomenal. GS, I'd probably say maybe go sideways a little bit more. It's rejecting at the 50 EMA. So if it could do something like it did here, where it popped and then went sideways, that's probably the best bet for it to continue to go higher. But the 50 EMA is really, really, a big spot for some of these stocks here. Soundhound, SOUN. I've actually forgot about this name. It looks pretty good. If you look at the weekly, it's building a pretty, big wedge. So it could potentially set up for a really big move here. Break over $10 is probably the spot for it. Looks like it's rejecting there. Yeah, this is recorded. MU. It looks like MU is probably going to retest the base breakdown. You could see that it broke out of a huge, massive base here. And it's retesting the 50 EMA and the breakdown level here. RGTI, yeah, that one, like all the other, quantum stocks, looks great. If it can break over 9.75, looks really, really good. $10 would be also like a big spot for it. Thoughts on ASATL compared to RKLB? It looks good. It's just a $3 stock, so it's going to be much harder to trade options on it, but it looks good. It's pretty solid. ISRG. This one looks good too. Medical specialties. Yeah, this looks good. It's building a nice base here under this 522 level. If it can break that spot, I could see a nice move up to 554. McDonald's is interesting. It hasn't really been able to break out over the highs, but I suspect if tech is a little bit weaker, it might do it sometime going into earnings. Last earnings that it had, it gapped up really nicely. So I suspect it will have some good numbers. It needs to get through 321. OKLO. This one's still a little bit weaker under the 50 EMA. So I would prefer to see it kind of shape up a little bit, go sideways, and then break the 50. That would be a really good long idea on it. But the volume patterns still look pretty bullish. It looks like a lot of buyers off the lows so far here. Not too many sellers. And the weekly just needs maybe more time to shape up. TEM, this is one of my favorite stocks. I think this is going to pull Palantir, guys. I think TEM is going to pull Palantir. I think it's coming all the way back up to the highs. I know that's really optimistic. But this is a really nice looking stock. In terms of the setup on it right now, though, it needs to go sideways for a little bit more because it already made a really big move off the lows. So it has to set up here on the daily time frame, around the 50 EMA. I just had a focus list. Wouldn't ZS be too extended? So technically, it is too extended from the 8 EMA. However, we need to add a little bit more context. So if you look at the weekly chart, absolutely massive weekly base, right? So already knowing that, right, the weekly is set up in like a 1 year base. So the daily might be a little bit extended, but I think it's ready to break out. Ideally, yes, it does go sideways, right? So I would love for it to go sideways. So this would be valid tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, you know, the whole week. So even if it doesn't break out early tomorrow, if it goes sideways and then breaks out, even better. But I think this is still one that I would trade tomorrow, just because if you look at the daily time frame, it has almost no resistance. Like the big level is like this gap, 226. So it just has so much room if it gets over that level. Also a ton of volume. Celsius. This one is rejecting the 50 EMA, so it might just go sideways for a little bit more. I think it maybe needs a little bit more time. Because you could see it ran really, you know, a lot off the lows from 25 to 40, and it's been struggling to get over this level. So I think it just needs to go sideways. It looks a little bit like the price action's less clean. How can you find stocks with the highest percentage shorts? You could just go on Google and search up highest short interest stocks. And then you could see like a list on Market Watch. So I didn't even know this was, actually I did know it's possible, but this stock, for example, has 190% of the float shorted, which is pretty crazy, right? So that's how you would see it, 190, and then you could see a list of some of the highest like short. So for example, like Hertz, KSS are known as really big short squeezes. So like if you look at Hertz, 45% of the float is still short here, so they can really get squeezed out. KSS, super shorted stock. So you know, if it does get some volume and stuff, it could, you know, short squeeze. But just because there's a lot of shorts doesn't necessarily mean it could squeeze. The setup still needs to be there, so keep that in mind. For example, if you look at Wolf, this stock is super heavily shorted, and it's getting into the gap, right? So this could be a little bit more interesting than something that doesn't really have like a setup. But that's how you would see it. So like Beyond Meats, APLD, these stocks are super shorted. The Trade Desk, TTD. This could be a decent reversal idea. It is bouncing off of a huge weekly spot here at $42. The daily is, you know, very extended to the downside, so it is on the weaker side, but there's just a lot of room for it to potentially be like a dead cat bounce up to the 50 EMA. So if it could get over like 54, could, you know, trade at least back to the 50 EMA for a dead cat bounce. Carvana. I think this needs to go sideways for a little bit. It kind of failed to get a lot of momentum through 237. I would like for it to step back up under 237 and then break out. But if it can get over 237, there's a lot of room for it to go higher because there's not really a lot of resistance between this move right here. Did I take into consideration we may get good news from China this week? Yeah, so we might get good news. We might get bad news though as well, right? So we have to be on our toes for any news. Be ready for either side and be prepared. Do I trade TQQ? Sometimes, but not really much, to be honest. I like to usually trade individual stocks. Affirm, solid. It popped through the 21 EMA. It's sitting at the 50 here. It might need a little bit more consolidation. It probably needs more consolidation. The 50 EMA is a very big resistance level, but if it can consolidate a little bit and then, you know, step back up for a move, kind of something like RKLB did. Could you see how like RKLB kind of broke the 50 and then pulled back in? This is kind of called like a wedge pop. That's a setup that I love to trade. So that's kind of what I would look at for it. RR, yeah, I was going to actually get to robotic stocks. Looks phenomenal, right? I really like robotic stocks. So if you guys are into the robotics theme, which I think everyone should be paying attention. RR, PDYN, those are the two stocks that I like the most. There's a few other ones that are nice. These are the two ones that I like the most. PDYN needs to get over 6.6, but both stocks look very good. Starbucks. Oh, shit. I actually typed it in chat. Starbucks. Potential higher low here. It is getting pretty tight on the hourly time frame. But this one is, really weak. There's a lot of, no volume as it's going up. I might even favor this one to the downside. It could potentially pop out of the wedge to the upside. But to me, this one looks a little bit more like a bear flag than it does anything else. It also has earnings coming up, so that could be pretty detrimental. Or, I guess it could be good as well. It really depends. Can I link your whole watch list? Yeah, I got you. There you go. BMY for short. I do like pharmaceutical stocks for short. Coming off of the pharmaceutical, tariff news. It should get a little bit tighter in my opinion. I would want it to go a little bit more sideways, but you could use like $47 as your level. Like if it breaks that low, you could take it. Archer, ACHR. I think this one looks great. Like this one, RKLB, ASTS, some of my favorite stocks. The weekly on it's phenomenal. It's retested the weekly 50. It's setting up a very similar wedge to what it did here before the big run up. So I think this one's going to be a nice one. It needs to tighten up a little bit more for like an entry at this point, but the weekly and daily look great. EL. This one's a little bit more on the weaker side. It kind of looks like a bear flag to me. I guess if it breaks 60, you could look to take it up to 65. But on the downside, if it breaks 56, you could look for it to come all the way back down to 48. Another one with earnings coming up, so just be cautious with that. ASTS looks great. I want for this one to break over 25. I think over 25 it can run up to 30. App is another one that looks nice. It's kind of curling off the lows. The weekly starting to, tighten up a little bit. The daily starting to tighten up. I think there's some good potential for this one. It does need to get back through the 50 EMA at 280. If we can get over 280, I do see it, getting up to 300 and maybe potentially 350. TEM, another great one. I really like this one. I would wait for it to, kind of consolidate a little bit, maybe buy it back into the 49 level, but it does look good. When would you enter for TEM and would you swing it? Yeah, I would swing it. I'm in shares for TEM, but I would want it to come back down to like maybe 49 to get options on it. Now that one, had a very nice gap up on earnings. It's kind of leading the software stocks higher, but it does need to go sideways. It is extended from the gap, right? So you'd want to see it now kind of go sideways a little bit and then set up for an entry, because at this point it is like very, very extended. So you want the 8 EMA, the 21, the 50 to start catching up. That could be a potential entry spot. Mara, another really good one. If this one can break over 14.7, I think it runs back to $16. Looks good. UNH overall, I think, is setting up for lower. It's breaking down out of a massive weekly base. It had one of the worst reactions to earnings it's had in a while. It is a little extended on the weekly to the downside, but look at this monthly candle. It's probably like one of the most bearish candles I think I've ever seen in my life. So I think it probably goes lower, but I wouldn't really chase it. I'd wait for the moving averages to catch up. Hood is amazing. Yeah, it looks really good. It just has earnings coming up, so be a little bit careful of that, because it's always a 50-50. But if it breaks over 50, I think it runs up to 54. I think Hood will have good earnings though. Hood, TEM, Palantir, these are some of my highest conviction stocks that I'm currently holding. What is ignition candle mean in your watch list? It basically means the stock made a really big move, something like now, for example, where it, you know, gapped up, made a huge move up with a ton of volume. It's just not ready to play yet because you don't want to be chasing a move like this. After a big ignition candle, you want to wait for the stock to go sideways and then move up, right? So for example, same thing happened here. You could see you have the big ignition candle and then the stock goes sideways for a few days. And then that's when it starts to run after it breaks out of this flag. So it basically puts these stocks on my radar and then I wait for them to set back up for an entry. TLT. At a very big spot here. It's sitting right at the 89 level. It needs to get back through 89 to run back up to $91. If it rejects, it can come back down to 85. Yeah, of course, MC. How do you decide between two setups in the same industry that look good? What fundamentals do you look at? Not necessarily have to do with fundamentals. It just depends on which stock, you know, a little bit more kind of like leaning towards in terms of the setup. So the setup might look, you know, very similar, but I'm still looking at one of the other names because they're a little bit better looking. For example, if you look at RKLB, I think it looks a little bit better than ASTS on the weekly, because it's just setting up a super clean flag. Whereas if you look at ASTS, it already kind of set up the flag. It broke out, but then came back down. That's not ideally what we'd want to see. Even though this is a double bottom, the flag should be a little bit cleaner. So that's why I would lean a little bit more towards that, even though the setups are similar. CMG, I like that one as well. With Kava too. I think both Kava CMG look good. There's a little bit like of a theme going on with food stocks. But yeah, this looks great. I think it just popped over the 50. It needs to get through $52 and then it can run all the way up to 55.3. Do Will and Giuliano trade with your same strategy? Sometimes I get confused as to why they take a certain stock because it doesn't really align with your strategy is. I mean, everyone has different strategies. You know, like Will's trades very similar to me, I would say. I would say Giuliano maybe is a little bit more different. Will is someone who I've traded with for a while, so that's probably why his strategy is a little bit more aligned to mine. But I think Giuliano's like slightly different. You can also notice that he trades like more, you know, weeklies and stuff like that. So a little bit different than what I do. But I think Will's is very similar. Like the last week, we've been almost in the same stocks, like every day. Where can I find whether a stock falls into the quantum or robotics, etc. categories? Well, you could look at the overall like sector list. So for example, if you go on like, you know, IONQ is a quantum stock. So you would go on like computer processing hardware. And then you'd have, you know, some stocks here that, you know, are potentially working on in the quantum sector. So like you have RGTI, QBTS. I think, I'm not sure if Sony would qualify, but I do think Dell, HPQ, SMCI would be. They do work on some quantum chips, HP as well. But that would be an easy way to do it. You could also search up, you know, like quantum sector stocks, right? And then you can kind of get an idea on, you know, the best quantum stocks. Like this would just be the easiest way to do it. Or you could use ChatGPT. Like there's so many, you know, sources that you could use for this. This would probably be the easiest, just clicking on it on TradingView. Same thing with like, if I go on RR, robotics, you can click on this and then you'll have a few lists of like some robotic stocks to look at as well. ASATL versus RKLB. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I guess you could trade. I mean, you could just trade both, right? Like if you can't distinguish, you could always just trade both. For example, on ASATL though, I would want for this big wedge to break first before trading it, because you could see it's been just going sideways, whereas RKLB is already breaking the base. So that would be my preferred, you know, setup. But you could trade both if, like, you know, they're both setting up really well. Any thoughts on Qualcomm? Qualcomm needs to reclaim this level right here, 150. That's where it broke down from. Big move lower off that spot, and now it's retesting right at that level. So you had support, support, support. Now it's going to be resistance. So if it can reclaim, probably gets back up here. If it rejects though, it might just set up in like a bear flag to move lower. So it's like at a very big spot right now. Novo, what's it's NVO, right? Yeah. NVO. This one is pretty being down, but it's coming down into a very big spot here. $58 looks massive. That's where it broke out in 2022 and then made that run up. I think NVO is the one that does like weight loss drugs, right? If I'm not mistaken. It could be a pretty decent opportunity off the lows. You need to see how earnings look on it, but it could be interesting. Obviously not my type of trade, because I don't really like to kind of like bottom pick stocks like this, but it could get interesting off these lows at 58. Is there a way to stay updated on your watch list on TradingView? Like, you mean this here? I don't think so. Like, I don't think it'll auto update. Yeah, I don't think it auto updates. I'm not sure though. That's something we have to search up. But I always post it. So NU, I think this looks good. It needs to break over 12.07 and then it can move back up. TSM. This is reclaiming a very big spot here at 160. It actually is pretty strong compared to a lot of other chip stocks, and it has a gap to fill all the way up to 170. So I think it should run up to that level, 170, and then that's the 50 EMA. So you'll see what it does there, and then kind of has this trend line here. Actually, it's breaking it right already. That would be kind of the next area to watch around the 50 there, 170. What trigger would I use for SMCI? Because it has earnings, I probably wouldn't trade it unless you take weeklies, I guess. But you could use either the previous high on Friday, or you could use 37.3. Either one of these could work. It's just really preference and what you think is going to be more of a key level. For me personally, I would probably want it over 37.44, but you could take like a half size position over 36.70 and then add more once it gets through that high. That could work. Serve is another robotic stocks. You know what? Serve into this level gets very interesting. They obviously sold off hard since NVIDIA, sold them off. But it's at a key spot here at the lows. I think this could be a pretty decent buy opportunity down here. Pretty good price, around $5. When a breakout happens on lower time frames with volume, are you putting your stop loss at the breakout level, or how do you know when to get out if it drops? I usually like to use low of day. So for example, let's say I'm looking at Palantir for a breakout. Go back on this example. If I wanted to break over this level here, and it does, like let's say the first 15 minutes, let's say I buy it, let's say on this candle right here, my stop's usually going to be low of day. That's usually like the most important level for this, because if it breaks low of day, it's likely to fill the gap and then kind of get ugly and it just failed to break out. So we wouldn't want that. So you can just use the low of day as stop. If you put it too close to the breakout level, what's going to happen is you're just going to get stopped out way too early on a lot of moves. Because sometimes stocks will, they'll move up, they'll kind of consolidate at the breakout level and then break out, but you'll get already stopped out by that point. So that's why the low of day would be a little bit safer. So another good example would be like Tesla. This is the trade that I took on Friday. I took it right here as it broke the kind of like the orb high. And then I put the stop at low of day, which was right here. But if you would have put it like, a little bit, closer, it's just a little bit too risky in terms of getting stopped out right away. So low of day stop is probably the best spot. RGTI versus QBTS. That's a hard one. Honestly, you could go either way. It really just depends on which one you like more. Which one has more liquid options. QBTS to me looked like it has a little bit more liquid options, which is why I picked it. Futures are down right now. Do you consider that going into tomorrow and the next week? Yeah, I am keeping an eye on it, obviously. But keep in mind that literally anything could happen tomorrow morning. Like it could open, green. So it's not really matter. It doesn't really matter much right now, but it matters in the morning. So that's why you want to wake up about like an hour, before the open, and then kind of, play out your plan. See if there's some setups and stuff that look a little bit like better than others. But that's why it's important to, wake up a little bit earlier and see how the markets are setting up and stuff. NXT does not look too bad either. Is that another solar stock, right? Yeah, it looks pretty good. I actually really like solar stocks. I think these could be nice. It is a solar stock, right? I think. I don't know. Can I explain an ignition candle? Yeah, so an ignition candle is basically a candle that is very, very clear to spot. It moves from the low to the high aggressively, right? So usually it's like double the normal candle. So if like the normal candle or like the average days range is like 5%, it would be like a 10% candle. So for example, this kind of candle here on Tesla would technically be an ignition candle because it's moving almost, twice the average daily range. And if you compare it to all the candles here, it's almost double, or even triple that. And this one right here would also be an ignition candle. The next thing you also want to see is very high volume, right? So that kind of ignites the move, and it will create like a continuation move. So you get ignition candle, continuation move, and then, the stock will go sideways and continue to go higher. So same thing happened here. You could see on Tesla, we had this big ignition candle and then big move up, ton of volume, right? So usually creates a nice continuation look. A lot of these setups you say they look good and you would take them, but why don't you add them to your focus list? Just too many names to monitor and manage. Yeah, you don't want to look at like 20 different names because, you see how many names I trade, Tristan. Like I literally trade 1 to 2, names a day. Like if I'm looking at 20 different stocks, I'm just going to get way too overwhelmed. So I'm picking the best setups. And the ones that how I like to envision it is like, I'm looking at the stock, right? And I'm like thinking if this is something I'll buy tomorrow. Like if I see this tomorrow and this is how the setup looks, am I buying this tomorrow? And most of the time, if I say no, then I probably wouldn't trade it because I want to have the confidence to buy it. For example, I saw Tesla and I was like, I'm buying this one because it had an inside day here. It went sideways. It had a clear key level to trade around. So to me, that's makes it just a lot easier to enter. So I'm always looking at the stocks and I'm like, is this something I would enter? If the answer is yes, then that would make my focus list. UAMY has been my favorite little guy. Yeah, this is a nice one. And sand going to break one way or another soon. This one looks good. It could run back to 4.88. Had a little bit of a rejection, obviously, on Friday. I think this probably moves kind of with gold, maybe. Non-energy minerals. But yeah, look to see if it can hold the 8 EMA and then tighten up. Looks solid. Any thoughts on SMCI? I honestly think SMCI should move higher. That's my personal opinion on it, but anything could happen with earnings. I do like the setup though. When you traded Tesla, I had to look back and didn't see it on your focus list. Apologies if it was, but what alerted you to trade that? Had you been closely eyeing it, or was it more of a calculated risk because it was rising Friday morning? So Tesla was right off the focus list. That one was one that I planned out. So if you look at my focus list for the day, right here, I had Tesla break over 260. So I basically traded the exact plan. I took it over 260. I took the 290 call. So that one was like pretty pre-planned. Sometimes I might take stocks that aren't planned though. And the reason why is just because there's a nice setup on them. So sometimes it's going to be very hard to like have a stock on like, what I'm trying to say is like, sometimes it'll be hard to have, clear breakout levels on some stocks. For example, I really want to trade crowd, but like for me to trade crowd, the only level I could probably use here is like 425, but like that would be chasing it, right? So sometimes I won't have a stock on my focus list, but I'll watch for it to like retest or hold a level and then take it. So that would be the only case where that would be not on my list, and I would still trade it. All right, Reddit Baba. Reddit looks solid. A lot of volume here on Friday. I think it moved very nicely in a sympathy with Google earnings. It needs to get through the 50 EMA, and then it could test up to 127 and then 141. And then Baba. China stocks are pretty interesting. Pretty low volume on the move up. But you could see, you had a very huge reaction off the 50 EMA, a ton of volume off that spot, and then it's been kind of pushing up. The weekly setup still looks great, right? You have a big move up, you have a big move up, you have a wedge. So there's a pretty nice pattern here setting up on Baba. Palantir, Avgo, Hood on my list. Yeah, those look great. Does Tesla need to consolidate before higher? I think it can, and it probably will, yeah. It's at a very key spot at like 290. Does Tesla need to consolidate? Oh, sorry, I already read that. Can I do Google? Yeah. Google looks like it rejected a little bit off the 50 EMA on the daily post earnings. I would like to see it hold 161, and then it can run back up to 170 and potentially 174. It just needs to start holding up at that spot. Why is Walmart on my need to tightening list? I just don't like the way it's been tightening up. You could see the daily, for example, has been having really long wicks off the highs. Right here, this is closing red. I would just like to see it go like sideways a little bit more. Like ideally for this one, it's been just slowly grinding higher, but I like to see kind of go sideways and then, set up. It's just something about the chart, just doesn't look that good to me. But it could be, ready as well. Costco, I like Costco. It just needs to get over 1,000. This one's been consolidating for a while. It just needs to get over 1,000, and then it can make a nice move. Meta, we'll see what happens with earnings. It did have a pretty good reaction off the Google earnings though. And it looks like it's like right at this trend line here. So I'd kind of watch. It's kind of like trying to break it, stay above the 21 EMA. If it could stay above, I could run all the way back up to 580. Lucid, looks good, but I like Rivian a little bit more just based off the volume patterns. Also the weekly on this one is still a little bit, weak. It's below the 50 weekly and stuff like that. I think Rivian is like right at the weekly 50. So this one would be a little bit better because if it breaks to the weekly 50, it could probably give a nice run up. What kind of system, when you analyze a chart with respect to timeframes? Also, what timeframes do you check most during the day? So all my setups are off the daily time frame, like 90% of the setups. During the day, I usually trade the 15 and 5 minute, but I'll look at the hourly sometimes just to see how that's shaping up as well. But 15 and 5 minute are going to be the key time frames during the day. Crowd looks great. Yeah, I just wanted to set up. Bully, I think I already answered that question, but I said, anything could change overnight. Sometimes, tomorrow morning it might just be a completely different, setup, and we might open up completely different. So overnight, I don't stress it, but tomorrow morning, I would like to wake up a little bit early, see how the markets are shaping up. That way I can adjust my plan, and I think it's important to do that. Uber, it did have a pretty big rejection candle here on the weekly, like right off this resistance. Like right off this trend line. It would ideally have to like set back up into that spot. I think it needs to go sideways a bit and then finally break out over that level. Setup's nice on the daily, but extended on the weekly. Is that always a red flag? Not necessarily. As long as it's very tight on the daily, it's fine for a smaller move. Just keep in mind the tighter the time frames on the tighter the bigger time frames, the more time you could take, right? So like if a stock has a very tight weekly, the more time you could take on it. If it has a very tight daily, but the weekly is extended, I would take just less time on it and try to play a quicker trade. Thoughts on MSTR? I think it just needs to go sideways a little bit and set up into like 343. But it looks good. Am I taking break and retest of your KL? What's a KL on those lower time frames? I'm taking the break of the trigger level. Oh, key level, yeah. Okay, so yeah, pretty much break and retest of key level. I don't really wait for the retest much. If it does, like if the stock offers a retest, I will take it. If the retest sets up, like for example, if it sets up like in a 15-minute flag or 5-minute flag, I would take it, or like maybe a an orb off the morning, like a 30-minute orb. That's when I would take it. But usually I like to see my stocks really move off the morning. Like I don't really like to look for retests. I like to look for momentum. So I usually take it just on a break of the key level with volume. FTNT. Would I say it's set up? It is set up, yes. It is set up. It needs to get through 102. If it can get through 102, it could run back up to 106. The moving averages are a little off where price is, so I would like to see that kind of get a little bit closer. But it does look good. Yeah, 15-minute orbs are good too. GE. Daily just looks really extended. Like this would need to go maybe retest or go sideways for it to be like a good setup to me. KRMN. Aerospace. Yeah, this is nice. The aerospace sector is so many different like good names. It's a new IPO, so I'd probably want to see a little bit more price action, but it does look solid. Do you usually buy as soon as market opens if your stock goes over the breakout level overnight? So overnight, no. Like ideally, I wouldn't like for it to gap up, right? Like if it gaps up, I'll probably sit out and wait for it to retest. That's like one of the only times I wait for retests, because we don't want to be buying a gap up because it's too extended. Like for example, if a stock's up 5% over the gap, over the key level I'm looking at, it just doesn't make sense risk to reward wise to buy it. So ideally, I wouldn't want it to be gapping over. If it does gap, you could look for it to set back up on the smaller time frames or look for a retest. If it doesn't gap and it breaks the level, then yeah, we could buy it right as the market opens. It just depends when it breaks out. For example, Tesla broke out right as it as the market opened. It gapped up above the level, but I waited for it to set up in like a 5-minute flag instead of taking it right off the morning, because I wanted to see a little bit more context into how it was setting up. Um, 5K account trades, probably RKLB and QBTS will be on the list for that. I will be a little bit careful with a lot of the earnings going on though, but those would be the two that I'd probably look at just because the contracts are pretty cheap on those. Maybe Rivian too and Mara. But yeah, that's pretty much gonna wrap it up for tonight, guys. Great stream. Hopefully you guys are able to get a little bit more prepared. Hopefully we have a great week. There's gonna be a lot of really good setups. So yeah, let's absolutely kill it. I'll see everybody on the next stream on next Sunday. So yep, hope everyone has a great week and have a great rest of your night. Later, guys.